Today, we're going to dive into a really complex and honestly pretty provocative argument that comes from evolutionary psychology. We're going to connect the dots between these huge societal forces, what the source calls structural violence, and something incredibly personal, mate quality, and the relationships inside the Black community. It's a heavy topic for sure, but the way the argument is laid out, you just have to take a closer look. In this quote, this is where it all kicks off. This is the central puzzle we're trying to solve. It's pulled from an analysis of an NYPD study, and it makes you ask a really fundamental question. How is it possible that a simple physical trait, something as basic as a person's height, gets a completely different reaction from society based on race? This isn't just some random fact. According to the argument we're about to explore, this is the very first domino in a long, long chain of consequences. All right, so where does this chain of events even begin? Well, the argument starts with something that happens in our own minds. Perception. Specifically, how certain traits we link with masculinity get interpreted in a totally different way when they show up on Black men. Now, the key term we need to get our heads around here is formidability. In evolutionary psychology, this isn't just about being strong. It's about the perceived ability to get your way or to inflict costs on your rivals. The source material argues our brains are basically wired to do a quick scan of people for this, using clues like height, how muscular someone is, or even how deep their voice is. And this brings us right back to that wild NYPD study. The analysis found a difference that is just stark. For white men, being tall was linked to positive things, like being seen as more competent or smarter. But for Black men, that exact same trait, height, was perceived as a sign of threat and danger, and that led to more unjustified police stops. So the crucial thing to realize is the trait itself isn't what's changing. It's the race of the man who has it. So you see the problem here, right? It creates this huge internal conflict. The very same masculine traits that can be seen as attractive in a partner, strength, a powerful presence, are at the exact same time seen as threatening by a competing group. This dual perception, as the source argues, it sets the stage for a very particular kind of reaction. So, okay, a group is seen as a threat. What's the next domino to fall? According to this evolutionary framework, the dominant group often rolls out strategies to neutralize that perceived threat. And that brings us to how the system itself responds. This leads us to another really important idea from the source, one from the famous evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers. It's called a cost-inflicting strategy. Now, this isn't just random bias. It's a deliberate pattern of behavior designed to actively sabotage a rival group's ability to compete for resources, for status, and yes, for mates. It's basically tribal competition played out on a massive societal scale. And believe me, this isn't just some abstract theory. The source material points to some really heavy, real-world examples. The war on drugs, which hit Black communities disproportionately hard, is pointed to by Trivers himself as a textbook case of a cost-inflicting strategy. And it doesn't stop there. Things like unfair incarceration rates, biased schools, and police brutality, they're all framed not as separate issues, but as parts of a larger playbook to hold down a group that's been labeled a rival. So what happens when you pile all of these strategies on top of each other year after year? You create what the source calls a discriminatory ecology. Think of it like an environment, a whole neighborhood or community, where the rules of the game are systematically rigged to be harsh, unstable, and unpredictable, but only for one specific group. It's an environment shaped by policy and prejudice, not by accident. Okay, let's recap for a second. We've gone from a simple perception of a trait to systemic strategies, to the creation of this entire hostile environment. So, what on earth does any of this have to do with mate quality? Well, according to this argument, everything. Because the target of all this, it isn't random at all. And this quote from psychiatrist Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who's cited a lot in the source material, well, it just hits the nail on the head. She argues that the attack is laser-focused on the Black man's functional role. The goal is to undermine his ability to be a provider and a protector, two of the absolute core components of mate quality from an evolutionary point of view. So it really boils down to this two-pronged attack. First, you undermine a man's ability to provide by creating barriers to good education and jobs. Second, you make it harder for him to protect anyone through things like disproportionate incarceration and police violence. The end goal, according to this framework, is to systematically lower his value as a partner. And look, there's some serious data to back this idea up. The source points to a huge study by the economist Raj Chetty. He found that the environment a black boy grows up in has a massive causal effect on how much he'll earn later in life. Things like not having a father around, often because of incarceration, and high levels of racial bias in the community create this vicious cycle that leaves black men economically stuck in place, from one generation to the next. Now, an attack like this, one that targets the mate quality of men, doesn't just stop with individuals. It creates this massive, destabilizing ripple effect that tears through the social fabric of the entire community. And this next number, honestly, it's just jaw-dropping. Get this, 90%. Let that sink in for a moment. According to the source, a staggering 90% of African Americans live in communities that have what's called a low sex ratio. This chart just lays out the incredible disparity. A low sex ratio means there are way more women than men. And this isn't some natural fluke. It's a direct result of that discriminatory ecology we talked about. High rates of homicide and incarceration are literally removing men from the community. And while only about 10% of white Americans live in these kinds of environments, it's the day-to-day reality for almost all black Americans. Now, from an evolutionary psychology perspective, an environment like that is a powder keg. It has totally predictable results. When men are a scarce resource, it completely changes the mating game. You see more short-term relationships, more intense competition among the men who are left, and ultimately, widespread unhappiness in relationships. The source even uses the term black gender war to describe the conflict and chaos that results, arguing it's a direct outcome of this engineered imbalance. Now, if you're still skeptical that an environment can have this much power, the source brings up an incredible historical case study to drive the point home. Back in the 19th century, racist laws created a discriminatory ecology for Chinese Americans that was so extreme, the sex ratio was 27 men for every 1 woman. And the result? Exactly what the theory predicts. High rates of violence, crime, addiction. But then, what happened when those racist laws were finally taken away and the ecology changed? The so-called dysfunctional behaviors, they just faded away. It's a powerful argument that it was the environment, not the culture, driving the behavior all along. And that's where this entire analysis leaves us, with one massive, critical question. If the root cause of all these social and relationship problems isn't bad individual choices, and it isn't group culture, but it's the harsh, discriminatory environment that people are forced to adapt to, then what does that mean for how we try to fix things? The source material leaves us right here, challenging us to totally rethink where we put the blame, and more importantly, where we focus our energy to actually make a change.